Welcome to the Advantage Podcast, a monthly unscripted conversation with host David Ashcraft and top leaders impacting our world. Created by pastors for pastors to strengthen our leadership and expand our knowledge and influence.
Well, hey guys, it is an honor today to have with us on the Advantage Podcast, Peter Greer. Peter, thank you for taking time to be with us today, and appreciate you very much.
Well, that is both ways. Thanks, David.
So let me just tell you guys real quick. Peter, I've known Peter now maybe, 10, 15 years, but I will say when I would travel around the country for a long time, and I tell Peter this all the time, and I would tell people that I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, then they would always say, oh, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, you must know Peter Greer and Hope International. And so his name was coming up. And this was before I knew of you, but hadn't necessarily met you. And so you have a great reputation outside of Pennsylvania. And so way to go for serving well and faithfully through Hope International.
Well, I would get the same question, David, when I'm traveling. Hey, do you know this church, LCBC? So no, appreciate that, and I love that we're having the opportunity to say let's keep growing Lancaster and our heart for the state and our heart for this world. So
Yeah.
Be on the journey
Exactly.
with it.
Well, there's a number of reasons why I wanted Peter to be in this discussion today. Peter, one of the things I appreciate about you is you are a Lancaster, you are a Pennsylvania guy, and I know you have a heart for our region and our area. And so, again, talking to pastors throughout Pennsylvania and some of the largest churches in Pennsylvania, but you are among many things, you're a prolific writer, and I know you do lots of writing. And as we finish up our time together, I want to ask you a little bit more about writing. But one of the books, and as you and I were talking ahead of time, I wasn't sure if it was your most recent book but one of your books was really talking and focusing in on the longevity of leaders and what brings about a successful long-term run for a leader. And realizing that our pastors that we're talking to today, for most of them, they've been in their church for a good while, and they have been very successful in leading their churches and leading their churches well. But wanted to jump in and talk a little bit specifically about what's the value maybe of a long-term leadership position? And then what are some of the qualities, characteristics that you find present in those that are long-term and doing well? So first of all, let me just kind of back up and say, why would anybody want to be there long-term? Is there value in being someplace long-term?
You're asking someone who's been in his current role for 21 years and whose father was a pastor at the same church for 35 years. So
is that right? I don't know that I knew that about you. So your dad was a long-term pastor. That's cool.
That's correct. Yep. In New England. Yeah. I grew up in Massachusetts.
Okay, very good.
You hope 21 years ago to join this organization. But and maybe taking a step back a little bit is I do love writing. You mentioned it. I do love writing. And a decade ago, I wrote a book with Chris Horst called Mission Drift. And it was how organizations move away from their Christ-centered mission and identity. And it was an exploration of that. What made the difference in organizations that drifted and organizations that stayed true? Because my guess is we all have examples that we can think of an organization that seems like over time, they just lost their way. They lost sight of what is most important. So that was a decade ago. The publisher reached out and was starting to talk about, does it make sense to do a Mission Drift 2.0? Does it make sense to kind of do a revised and expanded version? And I didn't love that idea. But what I have seen over the last 10 years is that it's not just organizations that lose their way. It is leaders who lose their way. And again, we do not need to pause very long to think about people that we know or that we read or that we studied and to realize they suddenly seem to have made some decisions that are just confusing of this. And so the question for me, using kind of the same methodology, was what makes the difference? What is it that allows some to have a long-term faithfulness in the same direction? And what is it that causes some to lose their way? And the conclusion, spoiler alert on this, is it's the same thing with organizations. It is small compromises compounded by time. That is what leads to drift, whether it is an organization or whether it is an individual. It is small compromises compounded by time. And so I would say to your question, what is the benefit of long-term leadership? I think that's where there's just so much more relationship. There's so much more impact. And there's so much more of an inability to lose your way as you start to take some things for granted. Maybe you stop paying attention to the small habits and disciplines. Maybe you stop paying attention to the small steps. And so I would just say for the pastors that are listening to this, the friends that are listening, there is no such thing as inconsequential small decisions. Every single one matters. And the question is, where are they taking you?
Yeah, good. So, Peter, first of all, then it's not necessarily, you can't assume that because somebody's been there long term, they've been successful or they've stayed on course long term. You're saying that sometimes maybe it's even a little bit more dangerous when you've been there long term because you can take things for granted. You can begin to drift, maybe without even noticing it.
Yeah, well said. And there's actually this one quote that we found that said, in latter years of ministry, the tendency is to rely on one's own competency, the ability to do things, rather than primarily on God. The tendency over time is to say, I've got this. I really don't need to that. And so what do you see in long-term leaderships? You see influence going up and you see a commitment to prayer going down. Over time, you see an ability to be great on stage, but an inability to actually be known deeply in relationship with others. And so over time, you have these gaps in areas that really matter, that are small, and maybe we had them earlier at one point, but over time, we rely on our strength, we rely on our abilities, and those stories tend to not end well. And so the question is, how do we, yes, grow in leadership, yes, grow in influence, yes, grow in capacity, but yes, grow closer to Christ as we are on this journey.
So, Peter, jumping to the end of the story, but then we'll come back and talk about what are some of those smaller missteps. When somebody does drift, when somebody does, you talked about the two, get my hands going the right direction, but the one going up, your leadership influence going up, but maybe the practices or relationship with Jesus and with others that are important going down. Did you study the end results, and does it always end in a crash if you're heading in those two different directions, or what is the likely outcome of that?
Yeah, it was really quite a time of study to spend 2 years talking with individuals or researching well-known and trying to learn from those that, by their own admission, did not have the long-term faithfulness in the same direction. And I am enormously grateful for their courage in sharing, for their candor, and for their pleading. And in many ways, I feel like, again, the book of Ecclesiastes, whether it was written by Solomon or someone writing as if they are Solomon, it is incredible to hear the refrain that Solomon said with the refrain that we heard today is, I missed it. I missed it. I missed what was most important. And I achieved a lot, but it was not worth the price. And again, the kind of deep dive in the example of Solomon, you're not going to find anyone where there is a bigger divide between knowing and doing. You read the Proverbs and you see what he knew, and then you look at his life and saw what he did. And there is this same issue that we're talking about. It is a growing gap between knowing and doing. And so I would just say, like, beware that gap. Beware. And when what we know to be true does not match the way that we are living, there should be some blinking red lights. Pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. Because again, end of his life, he looks back and says, I missed it. I just missed it. So yeah, an ancient story with a lot of modern relevance. Be careful of that gap between knowing and doing.
Yeah, good. So, Peter, I can't imagine anybody, any leader, any pastor wanting to fail at the end. And I know that we all get so tired, at least I get so tired of hearing people say, oh, another pastor, another church leader, ministry leader has failed. And typically it gets kind of lumped into all church leaders. Why do all church leaders, and especially those of us in larger churches, the cry against larger churches is, why is it that larger church pastors seem to fail at a higher rate? And we could debate whether that's even true, that it's a higher rate or not. But bottom line, pastors are failing. And I don't think there's a pastor listening that wants to fail in the end. And so you talked about a series of small missteps. And so, let's talk about what are some of those missteps. And I have a feeling, based on what you said already, they're going to be pretty basic, and we're all going to go, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, I knew that. And yet we've got to be reminded of that over and over, don't we? Because that's why we misstep, is they're there in front of us, but we just mess up. So can you give us some of the things that you found are some of those missteps?
Sure. Sure. And David, I have to add a giant kind of disclaimer on this is um, I go on the writing journey because I want to learn and grow. And so I never approach any subject as I've figured this out. I approach subjects as I want to learn from this. And
Mm,
the reality is I look around at people that I deeply respect and admire who have made some incredibly compromising decisions that impacted them, that impacted their family, and I believe impacted the collective credibility of the church in the world right now.
mm,
Like there is no such thing as one leader that loses their way that does not cause shrapnel on those that are closest to them, on their local community, and on the broader collective credibility. So
yeah,
I don't want that to be, but I
yeah,
believe Robert Robinson in his hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, I think he nailed it. He said, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave
yeah,
the God I love. He wrote that when he was 22 years old. And I think that refrain is so true. And then I read about Solomon, wisest, incredibly successful, and yet he lost his way. He literally asked God for wisdom. God granted him wisdom, and yet he still lost his way dramatically, causing incredible impact. You look at what happened to his family, you look at what happened to the nation, there is real significant harm that happened. And so I approach this one as, Lord, help me. I know I am prone to wander. Help me not to make a mess of things. Help me not to do it. So I hope the book is helpful to others. It has absolutely been help to me and
that's
made
good.
some significant impact. So again, no seed of judgment. And when I read stories of
Yeah,
individuals that lose their way, it is not, I can't believe they did that. My response is, that so easily could be my story too.
yeah,
Lord, here's my heart. Take and seal it for the courts above. Like constantly coming back. And so what are some of the practices? What are some of the things that we discovered? And I love what you said. It's nothing new. It's nothing new. But step number one is actually believing that there is vulnerability in all of us. Did you know that those that didn't fail well thought it would never happen to them? That is
mm,
one of the hallmarks. So there is no hubris having this conversation. There is a humility saying, it could happen to you, it could happen to me. Lord, help me. Number two, it was regularly reflecting on what in the book of Psalms talks about, teach me to number my days. This is like a concrete and practical exercise. And maybe this is a little bit odd, but I wrote my eulogy. And that is quite an activity. But I wrote it. It was Saturday morning, and I got like teary writing this. And guess where it is now? It's on my calendar. Every birthday, I read my eulogy, and there's something about teach us to number our days that just brings us back to what is most important. And if you write your eulogy, there are some things that you will notice are going to be missing from that. And it's a lot of what David Brooks talks about the resume virtues versus the eulogy virtues. That is going to cause us to live differently. David, I remember your sermon about your father and his
mm,
passing and the cardboard box on that.
yeah,
Teach us to number our days. And I think
yeah,
that shapes us. So again, and then it gets to the practical pieces. We found that those that had a personal, vibrant prayer life, there was a different level. And I think we make different decisions if we wait 24 hours and spend time, as Terry Looper says, getting neutral. We're going to make different decisions as a
yeah.
result of that. I could go on, but you're totally
No, those are great.
small steps. And small steps matter. Do they take us to a place that we want to end, the destination that we desire of long-term faithfulness, or do they slowly take us in a different direction? So that's at the end of the day what it matters. What we do today matters in our long-term story.
So let me go back to the first one. Just that acknowledgement that I can fail, that I am equally susceptible as anybody else. So, what would keep somebody from thinking they could fail? Dig a little deeper with that one for us, and why would I think I couldn't fail, or what do you see in people that don't seem to be willing to acknowledge that?
Yeah, well, David, I know you've had time with Jim Collins, and his writing has impacted a lot of us. I feel like his greatest work is not always there. We think of Good to Great or Built to Last. My favorite book of his is How the Mighty Fall.
Yeah,
And he wrote that after doing these case studies of these incredible organizations and then almost discovering oops, like their path changed. And he has 5 steps in that. And step number 1 is hubris born of success. Hubris born of success. And I think that there is a danger that, again, who you're interacting with, who's listening, there is success that they've achieved. They have done something to build, to create, to inspire. And I believe that success is a far more dangerous place to be spiritually than failure. And we all know that. We all know that when we have a moment of failure, there is a humility, there is a dependence, there's a prayerfulness that happens in those moments that is a little harder to come by when look at what is happening. And so I would just
Yeah.
say, like that one, beware of hubris born of success. That is a dangerous place. And the opposite of that is today, Lord, holy desperation. Am I living with a holy desperation? God, I don't know what to do today. Would you help? And so I think that really the posture that we start our day matters. And this is an ancient practice, but I think there is something that we have lost in a lot of church traditions about praying in a place of comfort versus praying in an intentional place of discomfort. There's something about a what we learned from Daniel. It gives us a detail. He would go and he would pray, and he did it on his knees. And that,
Mhm.
my growing up, that was not ever a part. But there's something about a physical posture that I think shapes our heart in a position of, Lord, I need you today. And so, yeah, that posture,
Yeah.
literal or yeah, kind of just as a metaphor, I think that matters a lot.
So interesting that you're almost linking that daily prayer with also that spirit of humility and expression of God, I need you. I can't do this on my own. Let me go back and just ask you a little bit, Peter. So, when we experience some success, we want to enjoy it a little bit. And I don't mean enjoy it as in sit around, pat me on the back kind of thing, but what's the balance between, okay, I have experienced some success. Again, all the pastors that we're talking to today are in the top 5% as far as leading churches, maybe even the top 1% of all churches in the country. Because if their churches are 1,000 or more, then they're in that top 99 percentile of leading churches. So they're being successful. And so what's that balance between, man, yes, you are successful, you are doing well, and then still ending up on your knees and saying, God, but I desperately need you. Is there a balance there, or how do you think of it? And you've experienced success in your career. And so, is there opportunity to somewhat enjoy that success? Or I don't even know if that makes sense. How do I enjoy my success? But yeah, talk a little bit about that. Does that
No,
make sense what I'm asking?
yeah, no, and I think of the wonderful, very small book that Tim Keller wrote, The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness. And he says the essence of gospel humility is not thinking too highly of yourself. It's not thinking too lowly of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.
Hmm.
And I love that. At the end of the day, if our focus is on look at what we have accomplished, we are in the top 1%. Um, that, in my mind, actually leads to some unhealthy outcomes down versus God, help me to be faithful today. And it's amazing what you're doing. And I'm just not really focusing on the number. Here's what I'm focusing on. Am I being faithful with what you have called? And I love the line that Paul writes. He says, what do I have that I haven't been given? And I think that is a different starting point. And yes, if you're giving growth, if you have an incredible ability to communicate, if you have done the right things and have a leadership mind, take that one step further and say, okay, great, you've worked hard, but where did that come from? Even your work ethic, where did that come from? And I think at the end of the day, if we can say, God, what do I have that you haven't given to me? What actually can I ultimately claim is all about me? I think we would be hard pressed to have a very long list. I think a different posture is, God, you have given this. This is amazing. Thank you, Lord, and help us be faithful with what we can do today to steward well this incredible opportunity that we've been given. So there's joy, there's celebration, and there is an upward and outward focus, and very little time polishing trophies,
Yeah.
more time washing feet.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So, what are the signs that I'm starting to slip in this area? Are there Is it as simple as, oop, I just realized that's been several days since I spent time with God? Or are there some telltale signs of you're starting to slip here and you're not showing, displaying, exhibiting as much dependence on God as probably you have in the past?
Well, I know we just mentioned it in passing, but I think it is fascinating that our Savior gave us the model of what leadership actually looks like. And the invitation after washing his disciples' feet is to go and do likewise. And I think that is not to be taken uh, literally in foot washing. It's not in this culture. That's the wrong piece of that. But what does it look like? And I would say, what are the tasks that no one else really highly esteems? And if you and your leadership have got to a place that you are no longer doing some of the tasks that are not common for positions of leadership, I would say maybe that's a great starting place. There's something wonderful that happens when you take out the trash. There's something wonderful that happens when you are the one who is showing up early and making sure the chairs are in the location. There's something wonderful that happens. And obviously, you can't do it all the time, but there is something about a posture of service, of doing the task that no one else wants to do. When that toilet has overflowed, who is the first person to roll up their sleeves? And I think the example that we have is there is something good that happens in those moments to our heart when our posture is in taking on the servant posture. So I think there literally is a benefit to doing those tasks that in our culture are just seen differently. I think the second thing, you're absolutely right. We found a connection to an individual's prayer practices, individually and collectively. And in prayer, if there is not a moment for reflection and repentance, we found that that was another key, like red blinking light. If we have not had enough time to reflect on our attitudes, our behavior, and found places where we maybe should spend a little more time saying, Lord, it's your mercy. And I lost my way again. There's something that should be a warning light on that. So habits and
Yeah.
postures, they
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah, that's good. I spent some time with Matt Lucas, who's the president of Our Daily Bread recently. They're just concluding and have been working on a study. I want to say it's 15 years, about 500,000 people. They were looking at what are the traits of people that have the strongest relationships with Christ. And what they found, and this is Our Daily Bread, and so it wasn't a matter of reading their devotional, but what they found is if somebody spends at least 4 times a week in prayer, reading scripture, that they tend to have the most vibrant relationship with Christ of anybody. And it just comes back to that basic practice again that you're describing. So yeah, good.
Forward to reading that study. That very much matches what
Yeah.
we've experienced. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So first one was just the small habits. You had a second one, which was I'm trying to go back to what your list was when you gave us. So do you remember what your second one is you gave us?
Sorry, David. I don't remember that
Well,
in
well,
specificity,
good.
but I'm sure it had something to do with prayer. We did the book Lead with Prayer, and that absolutely reinforced the connection there. So the small habits, the focus on prayer, and maybe the third one would be something about the way that we engage with others. And again, I think this is shaping of our heart. If our focus is only on our church, on our organization, I think that tends to lead to an inward focus. And for us, one of the hallmarks of organizations that really did experience health and leaders that really did is there was an excitement, not just what is happening in our little club, but in the broader kingdom of God and relationships outside, pushing back on the insularity that happens in leadership and really getting out in relationship with others and being more excited about what God is doing in our state and in our world than just what is happening within our particular place.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's good. Hey, I was going to mention one of the things that Ruth and I tried to do, and I don't know if this will come out sounding right or not, but the more that we grew as a church, it became easier and easier to insulate ourselves and only meet with people in leadership and only meet with people that were successful, so to speak, in their careers. And so we made it a habit of there were a number of we all have people in church that have more needs than others. And so we would make it a habit of, on a regular basis, meeting with people that would not be considered the elite of the elite in the church, just to bring us back to earth and say, okay, we're just normal people, and we can still meet with just normal people, and have meals and dinners with them. And it was actually a good thing for us. And it's not something that I would normally talk about, because it's almost like, oh, look at us because we're humbling ourselves. It wasn't meant to be that at all, but it was just to keep us kind of balanced and say, we're not so uppity that we can't eat and meet with other people. So yeah, little practices, like you said. So.
Well, David, one of the other really practical ones, I've seen you at different events, and you are not hanging out behind stage very long. You are sitting and engaging, and I think those little things, they matter. The
Yeah.
little things, valuing people, valuing relationship, and anytime someone wants to put you up on a pedestal, you are climbing down as quickly as possible. And isn't that the
Yeah.
example after the healing of a man who was lame since he was birthed in Lystra? And what do? They literally tear the clothes. They rush into the crowd saying, "Why are you doing this? We're just like you. Let us
Yeah.
tell you about the God, the one who made heaven and earth." And so they're literally, I mean, again, culturally not appropriate in today's space, but they wanted to make such a spectacle that they were not put on a pedestal, that God was the one who got all of the credit for this miraculous healing. And I think in a similar way, there's going to be amazing things that happen in these churches. There's going to be amazing things that happen through your leadership. And let's climb down those, whatever someone wants to put you on a pedestal, let's climb down as quickly as possible.
Exactly.
Find ways of saying, "Hey, let me tell you, this is all about Jesus. And I'm
Exactly.
just like you in the journey."
Exactly. Peter, you also talked about writing your eulogy. And I assume what you were doing and what you are doing as you do that is to say, okay, these are the things I want to be remembered for. And so do you find that that keeps you from making missteps when you think through how you hope you're described at the end? Do you find yourself checking yourself at times thinking, oh, if I'm going to end that way, then I better not go this direction or that? Or how do you find that helps you in the long run?
No, you're exactly right. It has that direct benefit. So I do it annually on my birthday. I read through my eulogy, and then I have a group of other kind of leaders in the space. We call ourselves the eulogists, and we do it as a group, which again may be odd, but I think that actually is the closest thing that we have found to teach us to number our days, like teach us to remember that this is not all that there is and what matters most. And I had the enormous privilege of being with my grandfather when he left this life, and being in the hospital room with him, watching my grandmother, who is the most regal woman. I mean, she just threw herself on her husband, and it was the most touching and beautiful moment of a
Mm,
life of loving and cherishing and honoring his spouse. And I think
mm.
of that. And so one of the things that I want to be true is that the people that are closest to me, yeah, it's great if I talk about, helping people all around the world. If my wife and kids do not feel that they were loved unconditionally, I have not failed. There is hypocrisy to care about people far away with not also caring about people that are closest to me. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it changes the decisions you make. It changes the way that you live, and it reframes what matters most.
Yeah, I've heard it said that there are probably a number of people that can change the world and carry the leadership roles that we're carrying, but there's nobody else that's been assigned to be the husband of my wife, of Ruth, or the father of my kids, Justin and Ashley, and our grandkids, and things like that. So, yeah, it's understanding the order of those things. Peter, you also talked earlier about just pausing 24 hours and saying, okay, if I wait 24 hours, am I still going to think this is a good decision later on? And so is that a practice that you try to carry and slow down, or is that just something that you keep in the back of your head, or what is your practice from that standpoint?
So, my guess is there's a similarity to everyone that is listening, but there are more opportunities to than time. There are more good things that we could do than time to do them all. And my default posture is to say yes immediately, whatever the request is. Would you go and do? Yes, I would love to. And you don't realize that with every yes, there is a corresponding no. There
Yeah.
is a cost that is paid. And so the question is, what is a process that can help you? And for me, it was slowing down. So yeah, I wait 24 hours before responding to any type of request. And personally, I have a travel cap. I know how many nights I'm away from home. And for me, that's my currency at this stage. We have 4 kids. We have now launched 2, but 2 are still at home. And that is my currency, is how many nights I travel. So I've got a set number, and slowing down, doesn't matter what the invitation is, slowing down and say, can I do this? And there's a greater cost for being away on weekends, by the way. That one counts double on that, because it is a significant impact. And so yeah, just slowing down, making sure you're clear. And for me, literally looking at the spreadsheet that says, how many more nights do I have this year? And is that the right way to spend them? And that has allowed me to make better decisions and to say switching some of the default yes to the default no, so that my presence, I am home. And that matters a lot to me, especially at this stage of fatherhood.
Which I love that, because it just shows we can control our calendars and we can say no. It is okay to do that. We don't have to say yes to everything. I've said this before, but one of the things our board at LCBC learned years ago is we would bring up a subject in a board meeting, would talk about it, would all get excited about it, would make a decision that night, and then would come back the next month and go, oh, that wasn't such a good decision. And when we talked about why we were coming back, changing our minds, a couple of things. One would say, well, we went home and we prayed about it more. We had time to reflect. Most of the time, we probably went home, talked to our spouses. They said that was a terrible idea. And so then the next month we came back and changed it. So we made a policy to say, let's not make a decision the first time it comes up. Let's wait, think about it for a month, talk to our spouses, reflect on it, and then make a decision. So yeah, there is such wisdom in saying, let's slow down and be careful and not make spur of the moment decisions that way. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, well, Peter, I appreciate you so much. I think you're a leader that is living well and modeling well for us. And I love your posture when you talked about writing, of saying, how do I learn myself? I'm not writing this because I've succeeded at this, but instead I want to learn about it. So talk about writing real quick, because again, we've got guys that are great communicators and probably have content that they sometimes think about putting into a book. So what even caused you to jump into the world of writing, and any practical tips you can give us?
Yeah, so writing was not part of my long-term plan, but I was on a hike with 2 individuals, Donald Miller and Jeremy Cowart, and they were asking what I do in my job and talking about global poverty alleviation through small business creation and missions, and how that intersects with our care for individuals in poverty around the world. And almost as a passing, Donald Miller said, you should write a book about it. And Jeremy is a photographer, and he said, you should include Jeremy's pictures in it. And he made it sound so easy. And
It always sounds easy, doesn't
it
it? Yeah.
does. And it turns out it's not that easy. But shortly afterwards, I was in Afghanistan, and I was on a helicopter in northern Afghanistan, and just saw Christian missions done in such a harmful way. This is
Mhm.
before when Helping Hurts came out, but it was just so clear. It was good intentions and bad results, and it was creating this unhealthy cycle of dependency. And so I was like, I got to start writing. So I started scribbling on the back of my business cards. I didn't have a notebook or anything, but I did have some business cards. I started scribbling, doing this outline for a book, and I got back and gave it to my friend Chris, who was working at Hope, and said, "This is a book. This is a book." And he's like, "No, Peter, those are illegible scribbles. That is all that this is." That turned into our first book, "The Poor Will Be Glad," and we did include Jeremy's pictures in it. And that was a way of us trying to help the church understand and maybe think differently about global missions. And what I learned from that are a couple things. One is I love the process of writing. It actually brought great joy. It clarified my thinking on that. And whether or not any books sold, it was a valuable use of time. And so I just loved then the process. And I just kind of got in the habit of almost every year starting with a question, not starting with a book, but starting with a question, and then diving deep into that topic. And so, again, some have done fairly well, some have not. But that to me is not the primary purpose. I love learning. I love growing. And so I guess that is the first thing that I would say is if you are writing to have the next purpose-driven life, that does not happen very often.
Yeah.
That is probably not the right motivation.
Yeah.
But if there's something that you have been thinking about, that you want to learn about, that you want to refine your thinking, that is a great thing. Second thing is just the daily habit. You got to write some words, and whatever your schedule is, you got to put time on the calendar, and don't go and start editing from page one again. You just got to keep getting the content out. For me, I've dedicated plane time for writing. So I mentioned I'm going to Burundi next weekend. I got a lot of plane time, and I know what I'm going to be writing on that. So just have the time, have the place. And then the third is I believe that the world of publishing has changed dramatically. And self-publishing is a perfectly respectable and great option. In some ways, there's some benefits to that as well. You don't have to wait a year before the book actually comes out. You can finish it and it can go out. And so some of the books we've self-published, some of them we've used a formal publisher. But all of that, I think, is downstream from, do you have the time set aside? Do you have the curiosity? And are you able to make incremental process? We always hire an editor and to make sure all of the thoughts kind of fit together. And so I've had the great privilege recently of working with Jill Heisey, who just is a master weaver. I work with other authors, so we kind of do, I'm a co-author, not an author, but we love, and she does just a brilliant job weaving and connecting and adding to that as well. So time, space, and a great editor, and then explore Kindle Direct Publishing, or you can go with a formal publisher, but some great options. And yeah, it truly has. It's been a great process that we've been on. Yeah, learning and growing.
And how many books have you written now? Like you're at 15, 16, aren't you? Somewhere in there?
Yes. Yep. So How Leaders Lose Their Way comes out September 16th. So I think that's number 16. Yep.
Yeah. Good for you. Cool. Peter, thank you. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you. And thank you for spending time with Pennsylvania pastors. We appreciate it very much.
As a pastor's kid, full of appreciation, respect, and gratitude to all of you. So thanks so much, David.
Thanks, Peter. Have a good day.
Thank you for listening to the Advantage Podcast with David Ashcraft and for participating in our goal to strengthen and encourage pastors and their churches so more people are introduced to Jesus across Pennsylvania. If you found this helpful, feel free to pass it along. To find out more about the work of The Advantage, visit our website at theadvantage.org.